Hello and welcome to the 2020-21 Media Innovators Speaker Series. My name's Andy Conti. I'm the director of the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University. As you already know, the COVID pandemic has changed almost every aspect of our lives. I mean, look at my long hair and my beard. Unfortunately, it also means that we can't all be together tonight at the Pittsburgh Playhouse. But we're not going to let that stop us from having meaningful conversations. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, however, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Herbine & Company, the accounting firm, has been with us from the very beginning, and we're grateful to have their continued support. The Downtown Community Development Corporation has been a great friend of the CMI and of the Speaker Series, and so we're glad to have them involved as well. And the Harris Grill bailed us out last year at a time when we desperately needed their help. And so now that the pandemic is ravaging restaurant workers and that whole industry, we want to ask you to support the Harris Grill and support other restaurant workers in whatever way you feel comfortable. Now I want to introduce tonight's speaker. Salena Zito was one of those people who identified long before 2016 and before the last presidential election that something was going on in the United States. She and I both worked at the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, and she traveled the country and she talked with voters and realized that people were feeling angry and that a lot of them said they were going to take it out at the polls. They wanted to send a message to Washington that they were upset with the way things were going, and we know how that turned out. And so we're excited to have her back today. Salena now writes for the Washington Examiner, where her column regularly appears. Her work also regularly appears in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. She's a commentator for CNN and Face the Nation, and she's written a book called The Great Revolt. Salena, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm a big fan of your column. I love reading the column, and I can't help noticing that lately you've had some that have been really spot on in terms of the presidential election. You're saying things that a lot of people aren't talking about, which is what you did in 2016 as well. And you wrote something this past week that is not going to make our listeners feel very comfortable tonight, because I think we're all looking for a way out of the circus and what's going on in Washington. And you wrote that the circus is not going to end. And I actually want to read it aloud, what you wrote, because I thought it really hit home for me. Trump was never the cause of the conservative populist coalition that put him in office. He was the result of it. After decades of voters' dissatisfaction with both political parties, institutions, government, and culture, they voted for themselves and their communities over both parties' establishments. It wasn't about voting for Trump. So what did you mean by that?
So this is a phenomena that I noticed that began back in 2006 when I covered the first big wave election since 1994. 2006, the Republicans held the majority in the Senate. They held the majority in Congress, and they also held the White House. And what happened with voters' sentiment about the Republicans was not that they started to like Democrats more. It's just that they were so mad at Republicans. And so they decided, the Democrats did something incredibly brilliant, and they replicated that in 2018, where they picked candidates that were not sort of Washington, D.C. Democrats. They picked candidates they recruited candidates, I shouldn't say picked. They recruited candidates that more reflected their districts. So you had Jason Altmaier in Western Pennsylvania. You had Patrick Murphy in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And they ran them as these sort of center-right, I'm going to roll up my sleeves, I'm from outside Washington, and I'm going to make a difference in D.C. And it took a while for people living in D.C. to understand that this wave was coming. And I can remember having this conversation with Karl Rove, who at the time was the political director for George W. Bush. And they had this apparatus called Voter Vault. And Voter Vault told you who was showing up. And I said to him, your candidates are going to lose. People are unhappy with you. And he said, oh no, my data shows me that my people are showing up. And I said, oh yeah, they're showing up. They're just not showing up for your guys. And that was the first moment where I knew that voters were trying to send a message to Washington that had nothing to do with a specific ideology. but had everything to do with their dissatisfaction with large government, larger institutions. They didn't believe, even in culture, they didn't believe that these entities were listening to what was upsetting them at the time. At the time, it was the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it was also, oddly enough, because people don't associate Republicans with this, too much big government. So what happens in 2006? The Democrats win. They win I actually, shockingly, down to the last seat, predicted exactly how many seats were going to be won. But that's because as a journalist, I was given the opportunity to travel across the country and go and listen to voters in those areas where I thought change was happening. So you get to 2006, the Democrats take over. And I know this is a long answer, but it's important to really get to the nugget of this. They get to DC, and the first thing they start talking about is expanding government. Now, Nancy Pelosi was elected Speaker. She didn't have a ton of power because you still had a Republican president. But it began, that wave continued in 2008, and Barack Obama was elected president. Now you have the Democrats with all the power. They have the White House. They have they have Congress. They have the U.S. Senate. And they misunderstood why voters put them in there. They wanted the voters wanted them to live up to their promise to be a different kind of governing body, to be different than George W. Bush, to be different than the Republicans, to stop the wars, right? To stop the big government spending. President Obama ran in an incredibly effective race on hope and change. His 2008 election was about aspiration. Voters believed that. Except what is the first thing that they did in 2009 was expand government. And you had the bailouts, you had the stimulus, you had TARP, then you had the Affordable Care Act. And voters rewarded the Democrats just 2 years in by putting the Republicans back in power, nearly doubling the wave that the Democrats had earned in 2006. So it gets to this point where voters keep telling Washington a message with their vote, and Washington keeps thinking, oh, well, you love us. You voted us back in. No, they just didn't like the other guys, and you were rewarded for that. So that shift, these waves back and forth. We also had another wave election in 2014. By 2015, Republicans held astronomical numbers not just in the House, but and they also held the Senate, but they also won all these down ballot races. It wasn't, though, about ideology. It was about being upset with big government, big institutions, big Hollywood. There were all kinds of other cultural things going on. So people were less ideological and more open to someone who was going to run against both parties. But because by 2015, voters had bought into Democrats and were disappointed, had bought into Republicans and were disappointed, and they believed the system needed broken apart. And that's why Donald Trump didn't cause this. This has been leading up to it since 2006. I would add, you throw in an industrial revolution with technology changing everything that we do. It changes our jobs, it changes how we communicate with each other, and that disruption adds to the polarization.
So then when you look at what's going on now then, right? I mean, so you're saying Trump basically got out in front of this crowd and he was able to tap into it. So then the question, I guess, now is, do people still see him as a disruptor, or are they looking for somebody to come in and disrupt what he's done, right?
Oh, they still see him as a disruptor.
Yeah.
That has never sort of changed about him.
Okay.
One of the things I have often said is that Trump will only lose this unique coalition that he put together if he becomes part of the swamp, and or is unable to curtail his his comportment problem, the way he delivers things. He excels at strengths when he can take control of a situation and make it better. People that support him would argue on foreign policy. He's been incredible at that. If you look at the way that he has isolated Iran, I don't think anybody from my generation or your generation would have ever thought that all these sort of peace deals that have happened in the Middle East would have ever happened in our lifetime. The heavy-handed way that he dealt with trade. And everyone thought in the beginning, oh dear God, that's not going to work. And at the end of the day, he got a trade deal that was widely supported by Democrats and Republicans in Washington, but also in the country. Trump's problem in 2020 became COVID. It has been sort of like an anvil around his neck. He is great at creating chaos to disrupt things. He's not great when he has to confront chaos. And so that has been his challenge. And that is why I vacillate sometimes every day, sometimes every 5 minutes, whether we are going to have there is a potential to either have a big Democratic wave that goes, and a wave is defined not by candidates at the top losing, not presidents and senators and Congress, but if you see legislative bodies in the state flip majorities, then that is a true wave. To not thinking that our polling is being effective enough to capture what's really happening.
Let's talk about that, the polling, because you brought that up in your column recently too, and and that's what I keep thinking back to 2016, was that all the polls showed that Hillary was going to win, to the point where a lot of people said, well, I don't have to vote for her because she's got such a lock on this thing.
Right.
There's no way that Trump could ever win. And yet then on election night, a lot of those same people were surprised, and a lot of them, here at the CMI, we saw them the next day. So is that happening again? Do you think we're getting a false sense of what's happening with the polls?
So I don't think so. Currently, the polls show Joe Biden up as large as double digits in some states, in some crucial battleground states. And I think our problem with I don't think he's up that high. I don't think he's not up though. There's a number of problems with our pollsters. First of all, I don't think they're trying to be heavy-handed. I don't think they're trying to sway something. I don't think they're trying to project an inner sentiment.
Okay.
What I do think is they have a problem with the people they're polling, because the people they're polling don't want to be honest with them.
Yeah.
Now think about that. In this age, if you get a phone call from an unknown number and they're asking how you feel about a race,
you hang up. That's what I do every time.
Everybody hangs up, and or you lie.
Right.
Because you don't trust it. But people are even less likely to lie these days because they wonder, like, where's this information going? They have my phone number. They have my name. They know where I live. They know how I feel about football. They know how I feel about Hollywood. They now know how I feel about politics. They know everything about me.
Right.
Do I really want to give them that? I don't think so. So our problem is there's a participation bias. What do I mean by that? Traditionally, we're at like 80% of people drop off when they're called by a pollster or a surveyor. Now we're at 99%. So what is the universe that we're capturing? The people that tend to want to answer these questions in a pollster tend to be upper educated people, college educated people, people with 2-3 degrees. They're more intellectually interested in participating in this and have less of a lack of trust. And so I'm concerned also that the polls are too heavily weighted towards educated people. I believe it's only 34% of Americans have college education. Well, that's a lot of people we're missing.
That's a lot, right? Yeah.
And so there's other things. Culture always gives us clues. if we're willing to pay attention to them. So there's a couple of clues in going on culturally that makes you also wonder, the polls are telling me one thing, but people and their behavior is telling me something else. Case in point, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
We've always been one of the top gun-owning states in this country, mostly because we have a very rich tradition of hunting, but also a very rich tradition in the protection of our house, our home.
That's where the revolution started.
It's exactly right. French and Indian War, right here.
Yeah.
Philadelphia, right there.
Yeah.
So we have 246,000 brand new gun owners since the beginning of June in this state. 40% of them are women, and I believe it's 20% of them are African American. If they are that concerned and have decided that this Second Amendment protection is important, now not all of them are going to vote for Trump, but there is this sort of unseen window into where this voter might go. This voter might just stay home. Does this voter, are they concerned about their safety in their city? Are they concerned about their safety during COVID? You know, there's all these little hints that we should at least question. And then there is the new voter registration of Republicans in this state. There's 198,000 brand new Republicans in Pennsylvania, 198,000 brand new Republicans in the state since 2018.
That's incredible. It's an incredible number.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats got some too. I think, and I forget what the number is. It's like minuscule compared to that. But that is astounding.
Yeah.
One of the things that people missed about Pennsylvania, and I think this is really, really critically important because it goes back to those two things that I'm talking about, is that on election night, people always are like, watching Wolf Blitzer, Pennsylvania's behind him, he points to it, it turned blue, and they didn't think about Pennsylvania until the next year.
Right.
They didn't wonder, like, how blue is Pennsylvania because it just voted for the Democrat. Since 1996, Pennsylvania has become 0.4% more Republican every 4 years. What does that mean? Well, in 1996, Bill Clinton won 28 of our 67 counties. By 2012, Barack Obama only won 13% of them. So we were already trending more Republican. And that was one of those cues that a lot of people missed. So I think that's another cultural cue. I also think one final cultural cue is how we have reacted to entities that we go to for relaxation and or to escape, like the NFL, have had a huge drop in viewership because they decided early on to become a social justice organization rather than a place for people to just like not think about work and not think about politics. And I believe the first Monday Night Football game that the Steelers played, I mean, the Steelers.
Yeah.
It was a 19.8% viewership loss. And I think part of our problem within our larger institutions, these sort of cultural curators in our lives, is that they have too many people that think alike in their decision-making process. When you do that, you're weighted against your own best interests, which are your consumers or your constituents or your viewers. And so like the NFL is a perfect example of that. If I can just go back to that as a good example. The NFL's headquarters are on Park Avenue in Manhattan. I would argue they would be better served to be in Canton, Ohio, where the Hall of Fame is.
Yeah.
Right? I think that all of our institutions where we've lost trust need more people in their boardrooms that maybe went to a state school, that has a little more pragmatic, whose parents maybe face painted every week before they went to a Browns game.
But that photo, where did you find that photo of me?
Right? I think that's a that's a big problem with Hollywood, with government, with even buying your soap. I mean, you go to buy soap and you get a social justice lecture before you buy soap. I just want to buy soap.
Yeah.
And it's not that people don't hold those values as important. They're just exhausted. So these are cultural cues that concern me, that our polling isn't. To circle back, I know that was like a long answer, but these are cultural cues that really concern me about our polling.
Yeah.
And so even though the polls tell us this is a democratic wave that's coming, anecdotally, and those cultural cues tell us, well, we need to put the brakes on that because maybe that's not what is happening.
I'm curious, because you didn't really mention it, but I'm curious what you think about the passion of the Trump supporters too, because I think you see that, especially when you live here in Pittsburgh and you travel outside of the city and you go to some of the rural areas around Pittsburgh, and I remember 4 years ago there was some passion for Trump, but now it's through the roof. It's much more.
I thought 2016 was crazy.
Yeah.
Right? And the way I approach journalism, or the way I approach reporting, is that I don't fly. Not because I'm afraid to, although now I don't think I'll ever fly again.
Right.
COVID. But I don't take turnpikes or interstates. I try to stick to the back roads. Yeah. Mainly because they tell more of a rich story, and you get to see a variety of different things, in particular in places that hold the lock on whether a president wins or doesn't win, or whether a party wins or doesn't win. In 2016, I first noticed right after the conventions. There was a convention in Cleveland and Philly. It was like the best world ever for me, right? But I drove back and forth between the two of them, and after the Democratic convention in Philadelphia, I'm driving across the Lincoln Highway, my favorite place in the whole wide world, and I see signs everywhere in places that they don't belong, in counties where there's never have elected. And they weren't just the signs that you go down to the Republican headquarters and pick up. These were homemade signs. Yeah. That's an intensity level that is hard to quantify, but it's huge. But I also saw houses painted with Trump on the side, and barns, and I even saw a horse with Trump painted on the side. And I'm like, what is this?
Well, yeah.
That is nothing compared to right now. People don't have one Trump sign. They have 19. And they have a flag. And there's usually a big sign in the front. Yeah. There are more Biden signs this time. Yeah. But having had conversations with people, I'll just stop and pull up and ask them about it. I'm like, did you switch your vote? No, I voted for Clinton. Well, I know I drove this road. Well, I didn't see a Clinton sign forever. That's because the Clinton team never sent signs, despite us asking for them. And that's an indictment on the way that campaign was handled.
My parents are still, it's hard where they live. Their neighbors talk about Biden, and you can't get stickers out there or signs or anything. So,
it's really difficult. Campaigns tend to not think signs are important. Yeah. We're in a different age. I think right now it is kind of important, and so his supporters are very enthusiastic. They can't wait to show up. Yeah. They literally can't wait to show up. I have seen not just anecdotal evidence. I've gone to Cambria County, which, by the way, Cambria County is the home of Jack Murtha. Right. Johnstown. If you think steel worker, Democrat, coal miners, you think Cambria County, right? Yeah. And for me to go out there to Johnstown and see a line of people changing their voter registration and or voting for the first time, and as a Republican, is just absolutely astounding to me. But yet Cambria County, which voted for Barack Obama in 2008, is now a majority Republican county. Wow. So just to bring this part of the discussion full circle, you also talked in the same column, though, that on the flip side, that it could be a totally different turnout if
Biden's support, if young people come out in support for Biden, is that the key on the
Yeah.
other side of it?
Yeah, that's the other side
And
of
it's,
it.
and it's important to remember that the margin of victory was so slim in Pennsylvania, right? It's not going to take a lot to tip it one way or the other.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. So Trump won the state by 41,000 votes. I identified 10 counties that just needed 2,000 more votes. And no matter what happened in Philadelphia, no matter if Hillary Clinton met and or exceeded Barack Obama's numbers, Donald Trump would win by about 40,000 votes. I wasn't far off. That same thing can hold true, but those 10 counties have to meet that number. They have to then get an additional 2% more, which isn't out of the realm having gone to all those 10 counties.
Yeah.
But also, I am keeping my eye on the 8 counties that sort of go across the top of the state. These are conservative Republican counties. They didn't turn out in the bigger numbers up there than the 10 counties that I identified with. These voters tend to be very conservative. And when they heard Donald Trump speak in 2016, he sounded like a liberal Democrat. They didn't have faith and or believe that he would have their back on things that were important to them, mostly Supreme Court and farming, funding for farming, better trade. He's delivered on both.
Yeah.
If they turn out 1% more than they did in 2016, he may be able to counter what's going to happen in Philadelphia.
But does Biden get any credit? I mean, he's from Pennsylvania. He was born here.
He says that a lot.
And he's a very different candidate than Hillary was. Certainly, he's tried to portray himself as much more conservative than that, or centrist.
So I think that Joe Biden has run what I call the Bob Casey campaign of 2006, which is do no harm. Say very little. Yeah. Be yourself, and let the other guy do all the talking, which is exactly what Bob Casey did in 2006. And he was very effective at that. Yeah. And he annihilated Rick Santorum. Now, 2006, as we talked about earlier, was not a good year for Republicans. That was a wave election year. Rick Santorum, even if he ran the most perfect campaign that year, would have lost. Having said that, he probably wouldn't have lost as big.
Yeah.
And I think this is the campaign, whether you like it or not, whether you are a progressive Democrat and you want to hear more from him on things that are important to you, or a moderate Democrat, or a Republican that finds Trump distasteful, you're okay with this, because this race isn't about Joe Biden. This race is about Donald Trump. It is a prosecution of, for good or bad, of whether he has done a good job and or his comportment has just taken you over the edge.
That's such a great comparison to Bob Casey. I've not heard anybody else put it that way. And
I covered it.
Yeah. I mean, and
as a reporter, it was so frustrating because he wouldn't take questions. Joe Biden. He wouldn't talk to reporters. Joe Biden. If he does talk to reporters, it's cute, but it's not so much. And like Bob Casey, Joe Biden has a wealth of goodwill because of a reputation that he's earned through the years.
It gives you a sense of stability, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I want to pivot a little bit and ask you about the role of the media in all of this and journalism, because in your column you also talked about, the politicians in Washington aren't getting it, but also the journalists in Washington don't get it. And you talk about how people still, this idea of reporters parachuting into Western Pennsylvania. They spend an afternoon or even a couple of days, go to a diner, go to a barber shop. We see this kind of reporting all the time. It's very off-putting to the people who live here. It was very off-putting after the 2016 election, and yet it continues to happen. So why is this still happening?
Because the problem within our profession is that the journalists that have the largest impression, that have the largest impact, and who have the largest voice live in Washington, D.C. and New York. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's where they live, and that's what they know. And if they came from a place like Iowa, they have long forgotten those traditions that were important to their families when they were growing up. The bulk of most journalists have Ivy League degrees. Again, I'm really proud of them. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But this is why it's important for newsrooms to have not just ethnic diversity. There needs to be more Hispanics. There needs to be more Asians. There needs to be more Blacks.
Yeah.
There also needs to be cultural diversity. There needs to be someone that sits in a newsroom, that sits in a pew every Sunday, that owns a gun, knows how to work a gun, knows what all the parts do, or someone that, practices a faith, no matter what that faith is. Because once you have that empathy, not sympathy, but empathy with the person you're sitting across, you're able to ask questions that aren't so off-putting. The first question is, why did you vote for Donald Trump? Like as if you're an insect.
Right.
Or an alien. It's incredibly, we need more diversity in our newsrooms. So when these reporters come in, their lifestyles are incredibly different than the people that they report on. And they don't know anyone like them. They don't know anyone that has had the struggles that they've had. They don't know anyone that has fought really hard so their community, like East Liverpool, Ohio, or Youngstown, Ohio, doesn't fall apart. They don't know anyone who went to college, got a degree, and decided to stay in their hometown and make it better. It's because so that they and their kids and their grandkids could have the same sort of experiences that they had as a kid. To that voter, that has as much wealth as getting a $30,000 a year bonus for doing a good job. They can't trade that off. They find more value in those experiences rather than in a big bonus, in a big car, etc.
Yeah. Is there anything that these journalists can do better than that? I mean, we know they're going to do this. We know they're going to come in, and that's why. And frankly, that's why so many people are, in Washington are mystified by you, right? Because you live out here with us, and
I live in the Paris of Appalachia.
Yeah, right. But what do you tell those other journalists then? What is your recommendation to them about how to better understand what's going on here?
I think that one of the tools that I have used, because I try to have an honest assessment of every state. If you're going to use social media as Twitter, let's say just Twitter as an example, begin with Twitter and follow not partisans but local reporters, so that you have a feel already what's important in this state.
Yeah.
I would start with Capitol Hill, like state capitol reporters, and then spread out. Those are the people who I would follow on social media. So then before you go to a state, you understand what the issues are. And then I wouldn't fly. And I wouldn't take the interstate. And it's grueling, and it's hard, and it's tiring. But the wealth of understanding is incredibly rewarding as a reporter.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect example. So when I would go to a Trump rally, say I was going to Wisconsin, well, I would leave like 5 days ahead of time. I would take the back roads to the town so I would understand how each county was changing as I got there, for the better or for the worse. And then I always stay in a bed and breakfast, not a Airbnb, because you don't meet anybody, but a bed and breakfast, because the first person that you meet is a small business owner. And that small business owner always knows where all the bodies are buried. Right. They know all the gossip. And then spend a day or two in that town. Go to church. Go to a bowling alley. Go to places where people congregate. Go to where the heart of that town is. Yeah. And just listen. Don't talk. Just listen to people. And then when I would go to a rally, I would get there 5 or 6 hours early. And the narrative in 2016 was these people are dangerous and scary, and you're going to get beat up if you went. It couldn't have been more opposite from the truth. It was like going to a Dave Matthews concert where people were like hitting the ball across the crowd. They brought their grandparents, they brought their folding chairs, some brought their hibachi, and it was a very aspirational thing. But because as journalists, we are trained to look for the oddest, weirdest thing as soon as we get somewhere, what would happen is they, the journalists would get there about 20 minutes before the rally started. They all came together, and they all flew in. They all stayed at the Marriott by the airport. Then they all came in the bus together, and they didn't have any interaction. They don't know this town. They don't know these people. And they start writing, and the first thing they see is the same 7 odd people. So you're sitting at home as a consumer of the news, and no matter what channel you put on, they've all highlighted the 7 weird people. Never mind, there's 24,000 other like normal people there. And those 7 odd people became the story. And then Trump's speech, they'd pick out the 7 most outrageous things that he said, and everyone's watching the same package. But those rallies are so much more than that. And they missed understanding the nuance and listening to what they heard. So you're at home and you're thinking, oh my God, he's never going to win. Oh my God, he is, these people are weird. And there's certainly not enough of these weird people around for him to win. And so I think that's why a lot of people just thought it couldn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I think journalists need to, if they're going to report on someone, they need to fairly understand what is important in that community.
We had, for our Media Innovators Speaker Series, we had CNN's Jim Acosta here in February, and he described a scene very, similar to what you just talked about, how whenever the media is penned in, and they're
we're
all
all in a
together,
pen.
It's very easy to identify them, and people would say terrible things. But then he would have these amazing one-on-one interactions with people. The same people that were flipping him off then were asking for his photograph, or if he offered them a chair, they
were the most popular journalist at a Trump rally. People talk to him all the time. People want their selfie with him. People want his autograph. There's a lot of stagery going on there. I have covered 30, 40 Trump rallies across the country. I have been in the cage. I've never felt genuinely threatened or afraid. It's part of Trump's shtick.
Right. Well, can you talk a little bit about how the Washington media has reacted to you, how they treat you, how do they embrace you, and do they act like you're an oracle for the rest of us out here? Do you feel like you're part of that now, or
no? Well, first of all, I've never left Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I before COVID, I went to D.C. somewhat frequently, but I mostly enjoy interviewing people, not politicians, to be really honest.
Yeah.
But it's been hit or miss. At CNN, people have treated me wonderfully, very respectful of how I see the world, and they may not. They probably more than often don't agree with what I report. But that's because they don't understand the people that I'm reporting on, not because they think it has been misreported. And what I do is just very, very different. I mean, I was just down 1,200 feet in a coal mine, But I think it's important to be able to report on that. I better experience it. Or how am I going to experience it? It's no different than going to a Black Baptist service, which is like one of my favorite things to do. It's a 4-hour-long service, and it's the most beautiful. It makes me want to be a Baptist every time I go. But if you don't sit there for 4 hours, if you don't understand how meaningful this Sunday tradition is, in particular in the South, but everywhere, then it's very difficult to report on this. Probably my worst criticisms have come from people who have an agenda, people who aren't really journalists, but they're commentators. And they've struggled a lot with Trump winning, and these tend to be conservative commentators. They've struggled with Trump winning, and they've struggled because of that. They believe that the Trump voter is this stereotype. They're old, they're white, they're bigots, and their time has passed. And because my reporting shows something completely different, or the book, The Great Revolt, shows a much more nuanced view of who this voter is, they have found me to be fair game to attack. But those really aren't other journalists. Those are more people on the opinion side.
Yeah. So tell us about you. Let's pivot to that a little bit. How did you get to this point? Now you're a nationally known journalist. You've got this book, best-selling book. And but how did this all start out? What did you? Yeah, I mean, where were you 4 years ago?
So 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago. Let's see, I had left the Pittsburgh Trib for a month. So the day that I left the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, there was a buyout, and I took the buyout. I didn't want to take the buyout, but it was clear that they were going to go in a different direction. And so I was literally walking out of the door of the Trib, and you know what that's like. It's an emotional thing. Newsrooms is like the land of the misfits toys, right?
Yeah.
We're this family, or at least in the moment, we're this family. I'm walking out, I'm weeping, and I get a text from the Trump campaign saying, "Would you like to interview the candidate?" And I was like, sure. And then I was like, I don't have a job. Where am I going to put this? I called several newspapers to see if they were interested, including the New York Times. They were not.
Okay.
But the Atlantic was.
Okay.
I did the interview. And in that interview, I said to the then candidate Trump, voters take you seriously, but they don't take everything you say literally. Where my profession takes everything you say literally, and they don't take you particularly seriously. He really kind of brushed the question off and just said, oh, that's interesting. But that line, which was originated by my co-author of the book, The Great Revolt, Brad Todd, just made national news. And it created an opportunity for me. From that moment on, from September 19th through Election Day, I worked for 4 different news organizations, writing 4 different stories while still traveling across the country 7 days a week, making nearly poverty level. But I wanted to at least see the election out. The election eve, the night before the election, I interviewed Mike Pence on the tarmac. Now, just backtrack a little bit. I understood Trump was going to win. Not because I wanted him to win. I don't vote in elections I cover, but because I just understood through my reporting. And I interviewed Mike Pence on the tarmac. I went home and I filed the story. I can't even remember who I filed the story with. And I cried because I'm going to tell you I cried 3 times in the next 2 minutes.
Okay, all right.
I cried because I knew I interviewed the next vice president of the United States, and I didn't have a job after the next day. So the next day, I had one last assignment. It was with the New York Post to cover election night in Pennsylvania. I first started out at Democratic headquarters in the city, and I was like, what? There was not much going on. There was not like a big vibe there. Yeah. Even though they were pretty convinced they were going to win, I'm like, well, I'm just going to go with the Republican side. So I went out to the South Hills of Pittsburgh, Crown Plaza, I think it was called, and I covered the election. I did the results there. Now there's a big long table when you're a reporter and you're covering a big event. There were reporters from all over the country, and even from other countries there. Wow. And I remember talking to the other ones, and they're all following Philadelphia to see what happens. I'm following my 10 counties. And I knew at 8:47 the election was over. Huh. I understood because he had won. I knew he won Pennsylvania. They showed up in the way that I anticipated that they would.
Yeah.
The next day, I filed my story for the New York Post. The next day, I got up, and if anybody follows me on Instagram, I'm no longer on Twitter, but if anyone follows me on Instagram, know they love that I bake.
Yeah.
So there's a bakery beside my house, and I decided, well, I'm going to apply and get a job at the bakery. So I I also cried that morning too, because I felt, at the moment, I was 57 years old, and I felt like a lot of Trump voters, in that my profession was dying. I would probably have to work 2 jobs, maybe 3, to make up for the salary that I no longer had as a journalist. And nobody really wanted me anymore.
Yeah.
And I think I cried in empathy, because I really understood in that moment how they felt, maybe more so than I ever felt when interviewing them. And so
You've cried 2 times now.
This is 2. Number 3 is coming.
Right.
I am walking to the bakery, which is not that far because it's beside my house, and I get a phone call from CNN. It's Jake Tapper's producer. And she said, hey, we'd like to have you on this afternoon. And of course, being Catholic and Italian and female, I thought I did something wrong. I said, why? Why? And they said, well, you're the only journalist that recognized that this would happen consistently, and you didn't back down from it. We would like to have you on. Oh, and we also like to hire you. And I cried again.
Yeah.
That's when I cried. After that moment, within a week, the New York Post kept me back on. I'm a weekly columnist for them. Within 10 days, the Washington Examiner, who was someone I was freelancing for, hired me as a daily reporter and a weekly columnist. Within a month, there were 5 different publishing houses in an auction to competing against each other for a book about what happened. And I really didn't want to write what happened. I wanted to write about the people that made it happen, and which is what I ended up doing. And it's literally a blueprint for understanding this new coalition. It's not a book about Trump at all.
Yeah.
And within 4 months, my columns became syndicated, and they're now in 150 plus newspapers.
Wow.
And I had for a while my own Sirius radio show. I had to take a break from that because that was a lot. It was a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I now contribute at the Wall Street Journal.
Okay. And can you, because you didn't come into this, you didn't grow up saying, I want to be a journalist. Tell us a little bit about what you did before this. You've had a lot of jobs.
I am your typical blue-collar kid who didn't know what they wanted to do, so they did a little of everything.
Okay.
I think those experiences actually helped me understand people because I've been in a variety of different places.
Yeah.
I owned a theater at one time, produced Reservoir Dogs as a play, but my most important role as a person is being part of my family. We still have Sunday dinners every week.
Yeah.
We also
here on the north side.
Here on the north side of Pittsburgh, Sunday dinner, also play bocce. I have 3 grandchildren, and those things are the single most important things to me in my life. That is what I center around.
Do you feel when you tell other journalists or Washington politicians you're dealing with that's your lifestyle? These are the choices you've made. Do you feel like they respect that, or do you feel like like many of the people you described tonight, that you feel belittled in some way?
One-on-one with a journalist or someone or a politician, no matter who they are, they not only respect that, they kind of yearn for it. They miss it. Mm-hmm. It's something that they either left behind and or never had. And they think that familiar connection is important.
Yeah.
And they also oftentimes feel sad that they're not in their own hometowns. They miss that.
Yeah.
While they love the excitement and the spotlight of being, in the center of the most powerful and wealthiest place in the country, that connection with home and family, there is a longing for that. Now, if you go on social media, that's a completely different story. But as I said, I left social media, and for a number of reasons. Most importantly, I didn't like how we treated each other on social media. I'm not talking about me specifically, just watching people interact. I find it incredibly cruel. And I don't think it makes me a very good journalist as well. I don't think it tells me what I need to know and understand.
Yeah. So to bring the whole thing full circle, what do you told us in 2016 you were watching 10 counties in Pennsylvania to get a feel for how turnout was going to be there. And based on that, you were able to predict, that Trump was going to win. What are you watching this time around?
So I'm watching those same 10 counties, Cambria, Westmoreland, Washington, Butler, Erie, Luzerne, Northampton, Bucks. Is that 10? I don't know. Yeah, I think it is. Okay. Or close enough.
Close to it, all right.
Close enough. Yeah. Also Lancaster and York.
Yeah.
Those are the counties that need to meet that number and exceed it about 2%.
Okay. And from 2% from 2016.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not that difficult. That's like 1,000 people.
Okay.
And the other counties I'm watching go across the top of the state. These are agriculture counties and energy counties. These were the more skeptical conservatives, the ones that didn't show up because they thought he was a Democrat. They thought he was a liberal. They need to get 2,000 more voters out of each of them. That's what I'm going to be watching on election night. I anticipate that Philadelphia will be the same as it was for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, maybe a combination of both. There's just a ceiling that it'll hit, but these other counties have to roll in to have President Trump win the state again.
And what about Allegheny County, Pittsburgh?
Allegheny County is a solid Democrat county.
Yeah.
I'll keep my eyes on some of the northern suburbs and the southern the suburbs all around. There has to be for Donald Trump to be winning Pennsylvania, he has to be at 35% in Allegheny County. If he is at 35% in Allegheny County, he has won the state. So if you're looking for a number, if he hits 35, he's won.
35% Allegheny County. Okay. And finally, you must get asked all the time, but what is your prediction? What do you think is going to happen?
I have no idea. It depends on what day of the week it is. I would say after the debate, the first debate, and then after the president getting COVID, the bottom crashed, and it's taken a long
for Trump, you mean?
For Trump,
yeah,
and it stayed there for a good 2 weeks, and it has now started to climb out. I don't know if it climbs out quick enough.
Yeah,
and that's why I go back and forth about this. The deciding voter in this election are senior citizens.
Okay.
That's who's going to decide the election. Not young people, not suburban moms, not NASCAR dads, not whatever name we want to give to people. It's going to be senior citizens. They vote 70% of the time, and they're a reliable vote. They swing back and forth. They gave Donald Trump a 7% advantage over Hillary Clinton. They have swung back towards Biden, mostly on Trump's comportment. But they are unsatisfied with they're having a tenuous relationship with Biden. If the president continues to talk about nothing except for the economy between now and Election Day, he stands a chance of winning them back. Because they're not just voting for themselves. Seniors aren't voting for themselves. They're voting for their kids and their grandkids.
Right.
Who's going to be the best one who's going to leave a better country for those people that are the most important to them?
Yeah. And what about for you? Where are you gonna watch the election? What do you do on Election Day? Do you have a tradition or things that you'll do this year?
It's so odd. I don't know what I'm going to do because of COVID.
Yeah.
Here in Allegheny County, the county executive Rich Fitzgerald will have a place where reporters can be, but it's not the same thing as like getting good hot dogs and a cookie table. right?
Right, yeah.
And having that vibrancy. I mean, election night is like one of the most exciting nights in American politics. Even when we worked in a newsroom, pizza,
Right.
really crappy pizza,
Right.
but it was this sense of community, and that's like so many things in this country, that is gone for at least now in the foreseeable future. So I'm not quite. I would be very sad if I'm sitting at home watching it, but that might end up being the case.
How concerned are you that it seems like we might not know the results the night of the election?
We are not going to know the results.
Okay. And
at
then
least a week.
How concerned are you that people are, how well are they going to handle that, Americans?
Well, we need to, our elected officials need to give at the most local level, give an accurate assessment. They can't overpromise. Then this shouldn't come from Trump or Biden.
Yeah.
It should come
you mean
from
of the counting, an assessment of the counting, or how long it's going to take to count? Or an
assessment to tell people, look, it's probably going to be 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
People need to, if our elected officials are honest with people, there's less likely to be a problem.
Yeah.
We shouldn't expect this to be a regular election night. Nothing has been regular in this year since February. This shouldn't be as well.
Are you concerned at all? Because I was on with a group of national journalists recently, and they were talking about they were preparing for violence in the days after the election. That if there's confusion about the outcome, that could lead to violence. Do you worry for that at all?
Well, I mean, I'm concerned about the people who want to incite violence, the people that are on the fringes. I'm not concerned about regular people, but you can get caught up in that. And I think that again, I think local elected officials have a responsibility to warn their citizens about this kind, to not get caught up in it. And I think that they should do a good job of keeping cities safe. It's not been all that effective. They've not all been all that effective over the summer. It was a summer of violence. I think they need to be prepared to do a much better job. If that is what they're anticipating, and they have plenty of intel to tell them if that's going to happen or not. But I don't think you're going to find this violence coming from regular people. I think you're going to see it coming from the far left and the far right, the fringes of society that feed and live off of this.
Yeah. And then the question will be whether people join in with that or not.
Yeah. I mean, people have to be level-headed. We will eventually know the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had elections that have dragged on for a very long time. This is not actually anything new. If they look at the election back in the 1800s, we had a couple of elections that went to the House.
Yeah.
We just have to be more cognizant and aware of history, and not always think that this is the worst moment ever. Because we've been around for 200 and almost 250 years. We've had a lot of worse moments.
Right. Good. All right. Well, on that note, we'll leave it there. And, no matter what happens, it's going to be interesting. And we'll look forward to what you have to say about it and your insights. So, Salena, thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And thanks to all of you at home for watching along. We look forward to when we can all be back in the Pittsburgh Playhouse together. And until then, you can follow what's going on at the Center for Media Innovation by going to thecenterformediainnovation.org. Thanks for joining us.